welcome back to the channel. As you guys saw in the intro, the Corvette is up on a lift, and also you can see the front end of the car is supported by the Greg Smith Equipment medium height jack stand. That's there because we're going to be taking a lot of weight out the back. And what are we taking out the back? The entire transaxle assembly that we've been working on in the last few videos. That's finally going to get installed into the car. And the reason you guys are going to want to use a jack stand like that, and, you know, tall height jack stand like that on any kind of two-post lift, is to help from having the front end actually teetering forward and collapse. Because what we're going to be doing is actually removing a bunch of weight off the rear end. We're removing both rear wheels, the subframe, the brakes, the transmission, and the differential, and that's a lot of weight in the back of the car. So you want to make sure that the car is supported properly, and by having that tall jack stand up front, the front end won't, it'll stay supported. It won't be front heavy and want to slide off the lift. So always be careful when you're using the lift and make sure you guys have the proper equipment. I'll have a link in the description below to those jack stands. The prices come down a little bit on those, and they're fairly affordable, but especially for the Max Jacks, it's a great tool that I would recommend you guys use, for any kind of major removal project and reassembly project on a car. So now that we've got the car supported, it's time to get the rear end and the rear suspension off the car. Alright guys, quick update. As you can see, I have the interior ripped out. I removed the center console. I removed the glove box lid that's here. And actually, those two rubber covers are just sitting on top of the trans tunnel. I actually had removed the entire shifter assembly. It's held in with those, I believe it's a T40. I believe it's a T40 or T45. 3 of those bolts are holding in the shifter assembly. 2 attach to the torque tube, and the third bolt attaches to the shifter cable. And I needed to get the shifter assembly off of the shifter cable because that shifter assembly, that rod, is going to go back into the transmission under the car. So I had to disconnect all that. I may have been able to leave the shifter in, but I just decided to remove it because just in case the torque tube has to move down at all, I don't want the shifter arm hitting the metal frame anywhere around the shifter assembly. So that's just another thing I removed just to make sure nothing hits. Alright guys, we're under the car now. As you can see, we got a lot tore out of here. You'll see the torque tube. I removed the mufflers and the mid pipe going from the headers to the back. So the mid pipe, H pipe, whatever you want to call it, the mufflers, those have been all removed. I removed the torque tube plate, all like 40 bolts. You can see how there's a ton of bolt holes through there. Removed all that. And then the suspension, I removed the coilovers. And as you guys can see, I have the trans jack set up supporting the transmission, and I put the safety chain around it and tightened everything down. Alright guys, we last left off with me trying to take the transmission out of the car, and I was able to get that out. Actually, you'll see the transaxle right here on the pallet, but the problem I ran into was the transmission and the rear cradle on my transmission jack wanted to tip over, and that was real scary, trying to make sure that the diff and all that wouldn't flip off the back of the transmission jack. To help resolve that problem, I grabbed one of my Greg Smith Equipment jack stands, tall jack stands, put that on the back underneath the sway bar back here, and I was able to balance the beam, the transaxle, and the rear diff. But there's still too much weight on that, and that was in the driveway at that point. I had to get all the stuff inside. So what I ended up doing was I took the 4 transmission mounts, the bolts out of the bottom of the subframe, and I also disconnected the passenger side brake line. I had already done the driver's side. That was just to get it off of the frame and disconnect it from the frame and be able to drop it out of the car. But I also had to disconnect the passenger side, and by disconnecting both brake lines on each side, that will allow you to drop the entire subframe assembly from the transaxle. And actually, I didn't really have to disconnect the passenger side. The reason I needed to was to actually get the nuts off the axle. So, because the way the suspension was, like, and the subframe, I could not get the axle out of the diff case. I had to pull that out. So that's also been pulled out. Those are over in the main bay. Now that transaxle assembly weighs a bunch. It's probably at least 200 pounds, maybe 250. I don't know, it's pretty heavy, so I couldn't get it by myself. So I actually had to wait. As you guys can see, it's nice outside, it's not dark. So I actually had to wait until today and have a buddy come over and help me move all the stuff around. So let's get the transmission into the car. Got it. Alright guys, as you just saw, this just takes a bit of finagling to get the transmission back in place. I was kind of concerned that the splines were going to be a different count, but they're the same. Torque tube is it's not moving, it's held up with a jack stand. So I just had to, wiggle the trans up, down, left, right. Finally I got it on the same plane as the torque tube and press hard enough and it slid right in. You can see the differential coolers installed. I also installed the lines. This is going down and forward. And I had to install both of those before I could really finish up installing the transmission. There is a E-clip inside the transmission case on the passenger side. That was kind of tricky to get lined up and everything pinned in, but the entire diff trans cooler assembly, that stuff's all finished. All the safety clips are in. You will also notice that I have the lower diff trans brace installed. We're going to get the subframe into place. Got the rear subframe in. This was actually kind of tricky because I had actually initially tightened the transmission diff mounts. You saw that in the previous video. I'd already tightened those down. I actually had to loosen those back up, and that way I could maneuver the diff into alignment with the subframe, because this whole assembly, it was just cockeyed for some reason. May have been just the way it was sitting on the transmission jack right here, but I had to loosen those mounts up, back out the bolts a little bit, and finally I was able to get everything lined up. I have got the axles back in, as you can see. Alright guys, we finished with the install of the transmission. As you can see, the torque tube plate's back in place. The torque tube tamer brace, that's in place. The lower transmission braces are in place. You can also see the upper with the flashlight. The upper lower are in. The transmission mounts are in place there. And from the back, I kind of wanted to show what you can see. You got the Z06 diff cooler coming out the back of the pump. There's the cooler assembly itself. And then you got the e-brake and the wiring lines. So we're pretty much done with reassembly. Alright guys, so that's going to be it for the transmission project. The lines are all hooked up. The braces, the upper lower, the torque tube brace, the subframe mounts, everything's been installed. Everything's been torqued to spec, and all of the electrical has been hooked up as well. Now guys, there is one thing I didn't show, but when I was swapping the transmission, the 2005 transmission has two plugs on the side right here. You can see it right here. With the 2006 transmission up, as you guys can see, there's only one plug. They have the second Boss, but after 2006, they didn't use that sensor. So for you guys swapping in a TR6060, 06 plus T56, this is all going to be the same. Guys, the wiring on this is super simple. I didn't need to film it. I can just explain it. Connect the dark two blue wires together. Connect the light blue and the green wire together, and that's your two plugs just became one. Those two sensors are the same exact sensor, same partner, same everything. They just changed the harness in the later cars, going from the two plugs to one. Plug it in, bam, you're done. So it's a real simple wiring job, and you guys are gonna have to do that anyway, especially with the 2005. Now 06 and newer, no wiring at all, because the transmissions, sensors, the plugs are all the same. It's this oddball 2005. And guys, I don't even think the C5 did that. I think it was just the one plug. So 2005, kind of a weird transition year. Let's try new shit. I don't know, but it's just something goofy that GM did. And there's like 2 threads on Corvette forums about this particular swap into the 05. So wasn't a ton of information, but you know, I talked to a few people, and like I said, tie the 2 plugs into one, you're good. The coolant system for the transmission and diff, the only thing that I had to change was the driver's side hoses, pipes. Those came with the transmission, but I also had to replace the main pipe that goes from the back of the car and up near the oil pan. I replaced that with the Z06 spec one, and that everything plug and play, everything, it tied into the factory Z51 stuff with 0 issues. Everything plug and play. So I hope this video was informational for you guys. I know there's a lot of information going on with this Z06 swap into an 05, and then you got wiring and hoses and all that stuff, but it's not too complex. You guys can do it by yourself. I mean, the only advantage I have, I've got a 2-post lift. You know, if you had a jack stands and a really tall jack stand in the driveway, you can do this on your back in the driveway. I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done. So if I can do this stuff, you guys can do it. So I'm gonna end this here. If you guys like the video, give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. Thanks and have a great day.